So today's topic is epistaxis. Okay. So this is an important topic for which you should be prepared both theoretically as well as clinically, right? So how do you define epistaxis? It's bleeding through nose, which is a sign per se and not a disease. Okay. It can be seen in all age groups and presents as an emergency. Please let me know if I am very fast or very slow. Okay. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I
Yes, ma'am.
audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yeah. Now, epistaxis is a Greek word meaning nosebleed. Now, this has been a part of the human experience from early times. Even Hippocrates commented that holding pressure on the nose helped to stop the bleeding. Kesselbach and Little in 1879 were the first to identify the nasal septum's anterior plexus, that is the Little's area, Kesselbach's plexus, as a source of nasal bleed. Pills in 1869 was the first to surgically treat epistaxis with arterial ligation. Change. Why this is not changing? Stop the engine. Just a minute. नहीं 6 लगेगा. Okay. So, as we said, bleeding from the nose is epistaxis seen in all age groups, presents as an emergency. It is a sign per se and not a disease. And to know more about epistaxis in detail, you should know what is the blood supply of the nose. Now, nose is richly supplied by both the external and the internal carotid system, both on the septum and the lateral walls. So, on the septum, the internal carotid system, that is the anterior ethmoidal artery and the posterior ethmoidal artery, which are branches of the ophthalmic artery. Now, external carotid system, as you can see here, the sphenopalatine artery, which is called as the artery of epistaxis. Now, this comes as an MCQ for you, you must remember. Sphenopalatine artery is called as the artery of epistaxis. So, it is a major cause for posterior epistaxis is the sphenopalatine artery. So, it is a branch of the maxillary artery, which gives the nasopalatine and the posterior nasal septal branches. Now, septal branch of greater palatine artery, okay, which is again a branch of the maxillary artery. Then septal branch of superior labial. See, superior labial is this branch that comes here. So all these form the Kesselbach's plexus. So the anterior ethmoid, the posterior ethmoid, the sphenopalatine and the septal branch of the superior labial and the greater palatine. This is your greater palatine. Okay. Now, the lateral wall is supplied by the internal carotid system, again the anterior ethmoid and the posterior ethmoid, which is branches of the ophthalmic artery. So, both the septum and the lateral wall are supplied by the anterior and posterior ethmoidal artery. Okay. This is the same thing. The lateral wall now, again the external carotid system, what are the branches that supply? It is the posterior lateral nasal, which is from the sphenopalatine artery, the greater palatine artery from the maxillary, nasal branch of the anterior superior dental, that is from the infraorbital branch of the maxillary, and branches of the facial artery to the nasal vestibule. Okay. Now, a short note may come on Little's area. So, you know your question paper has changed now to 20 MCQs, that is carrying 10 marks. So half mark MCQ, that is 10 marks, 20 MCQs. Each has half mark. And you have the rest of the 20 marks in the form, 30 marks in the form of your SAQs. So any 6 out of 7. Okay, so Little's area might come as a SAQ. Bleeding, this blood supply of the septum can come as a SAQ. Kesselbach's plexus can come as a short answer question. So you must read this topic in detail. So there are about 7-8 types of SAQs you can get on this topic. Now Little's area is situated in the antero-inferior part of the nasal septum, just above the vestibule. So what is the vestibule? Vestibule is the hair-lined area of the nose. So just behind it is your Little's area. So Little's area is situated in the antero-inferior part of the nasal septum. So there are 4 arteries mainly that come and coalesce in this area. That is the anterior ethmoid, especially the anterior ethmoid, so, but posterior ethmoid also plays a role. Then the sphenopalatine artery, as I told you, the greater palatine septal branch, and the superior labial artery, the septal branch. So all these areas anastomose, all these vessels anastomose and form a vascular plexus, that is called as the Kesselbach's plexus. Now remember, Little's area is anterior and the plexus formed is the Kesselbach's plexus, and the Woodruff's area is posteriorly over the septum. So Woodruff's plexus is behind, whereas Kesselbach's plexus is anteriorly, and the Little's area is the area of the Kesselbach's plexus formed by the anterior ethmoid, posterior ethmoid artery, the sphenopalatine artery, superior labial, and the greater palatine artery. So superior labial and greater palatine come from below, whereas from above you have the sphenopalatine posteriorly, and anteriorly you have the anterior and posterior ethmoid. Am I clear? Okay. Now second important thing is this area being anterior is exposed to the drying effect of inspiratory currents. Okay, and is very liable for nose picking by the children. So in children, this is the area of bleeding. Okay, because they handle their nose, what is called as nose picking, and this area is exposed to dry effects of the inspiratory air currents. This has more scope for bleeding. So this is the importance of the Little's area, where you get the Kesselbach's plexus. Now another vessel that is important. So this is what about we talked about was arterial bleed. Now there can be something called as venous bleed also. So especially in young persons, you get venous bleeding from the nose, and this is because of the retrocolumnar vein. So where is this vein situated? This vein runs vertically downwards just behind the columella. So you know what is the area in between the two nostrils, the middle wall that is there, that is the columella. So this vein crosses the floor of the nose and joins the venous plexus on the lateral nasal wall. So this is a common site of venous bleed in young persons. So in the nose, you can get arterial bleed as well as venous bleed. But arterial bleed is more common than venous bleed. But you can get venous bleed in young persons because of the rupture of the retrocolumnar vein. Now we come to the most important subtopic, that is the causes or etiology of epistaxis. So causes can be local, can be general, or idiopathic. Now idiopathic is where the cause is not known. So most of the times we investigate the patient, we try to do all the things, but still we don't find a cause for the epistaxis. So that is a third group, that is idiopathic. But mind you, unless you rule out all the causes of epistaxis, you cannot label the patient as idiopathic epistaxis. This is not only for the topic of epistaxis, but otherwise also. Unless you rule out the other things, you cannot label the patient as idiopathic. So local is causes in the nose and the nasopharynx. Then you have some general causes and then the idiopathic. Now, local causes, as we said, can be in the nose and the nasopharynx. So first common cause is trauma, especially in children, what we call as nose picking. Sometimes even in adults, in hot and dry climates, they can have crusting in the nose, and then they try to dislodge the crust and cause trauma to the nose, and then they can be epistaxis. So infections can be acute or chronic. Under acute, you have viral rhinitis, you have diphtheritic rhinitis and acute rhinosinusitis. Under chronic, you have crust forming diseases of the nose, especially atrophic rhinitis and rhinitis sicca. So you know atrophic rhinitis we are going to discuss in the next topic. It has not been covered. So here you have atrophic changes in the nose and crust formation with loss of sense of smell, and the people around the patient get smell fetid odor from the patient's nose, and that is called as ozena. Okay, so we are going to study in detail about this topic in the next lecture. So in this disease, crust formation is there, and when these crusts are dislodged, they can be epistaxis. Now rhinitis sicca is in patients those who work in very dry working places like near furnaces and all. Here the mucosa becomes dry, and this is called as rhinitis sicca. So in this again there can be crust formation and bleeding. Then third common cause is foreign bodies. Now foreign bodies can be non-living like neglected foreign bodies and rhinolith. So what is a rhinolith? So the foreign body forms a nidus, and around that there's deposition of calcium phosphate and calcium carbonate crystals, and that becomes a stony hard like a foreign body in the nose, and it is when you touch it with a wax hook or a probe, it is gritty and stony in consistency. Now living can be because of maggots and leeches. So again, atrophic rhinitis, I told you there is the atrophy of the mucosa. The mucosa becomes insensitive, and the patient is not aware that the flies can go inside his nose, sit there, lay eggs, and these eggs turn into hatch into larvae, and this the larval stage of this flies is called as maggots. So likewise, leeches also can be found in the nose. So these are the living foreign bodies that can cause epistaxis. Now, neoplasms of the nose and the paranasal sinuses. So benign are angiomas, hemangiomas, papillomas. Malignant are carcinomas and sarcomas. Now, some atmospheric changes also can cause epistaxis. So epistaxis is frank blood from the nose. So you must differentiate it from blood-stained or serosanguinous discharge. So blood-stained discharge is a sign of rather diseases like atrophic rhinitis, malignancy, and malignancy. But epistaxis is just fresh blood that is coming out from the nose. Now atmospheric changes like high altitude. So at high altitude, how can a patient get bleeding from the nose? So as you go high up, you know, the oxygen level goes on reducing, the air becomes much lighter, and this leads to drying of the nose, and the drying of the nose can lead to epistaxis. Okay. Now likewise sudden decompression. So in scuba divers and all, you can see due to sudden decompression, because they don't get time for equalization of the pressure in the nose and in the atmosphere. Okay. So there are some rules and regulations for scuba diving that when they want equalization, they should come back again at the surface and then equalize the pressure and then go down. But when in newcomers, if this they don't know or are not aware of this, sudden decompression can cause, because of mal-equalization of the pressure, can cause epistaxis from the nose. Then the next thing is DNS with spurs. So you know the spurs are sharp bony projections which can be found at the junction of the septum, the bony septum and the cartilaginous septum, or bone to bone. So this is the spur. So these are sharp bony projections which is described as a type of deviated nasal septum. So if these spurs are there and if the patient handles, there can be bleeding. Now, what are the causes in the nasopharynx? So adenoiditis, inflammation of the adenoids, adenoids are situated at the roof and the posterior wall of the nasopharynx. So inflammation of these adenoids in children can cause epistaxis. Then juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. This is a topic on its own, very important. So in a adolescent male, if he comes with profuse bleeding from the nose, your first diagnosis should be juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. So this is not there in the nose, but this mass is situated in the nasopharynx. It is posteriorly. So when you do posterior rhinoscopy or on X-ray and CT, you can visualize. But when the young male, 14 or 15 years old male, comes with repeated episodes of epistaxis and profuse epistaxis, you should have in mind juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma as the diagnosis. Now, in elderly patients, nasopharyngeal malignancy, carcinoma of the nasopharynx, can be a cause of epistaxis. Now, there are some general causes. So many a times you get hypertensive patients who come to the OPD, they are already diagnosed hypertensive, or they are newly hypertensive undiagnosed patients, or they have taken irregular treatment, and these patients, because of high blood pressure, can get profuse general bleeding from the nose, that is generalized epistaxis. So you cannot pinpoint the site of bleeding in these patients, and that is why we have to pack both the nostrils in for systemic cause of epistaxis as a rule. So in the cardiovascular system, hypertension and arteriosclerosis can be the general cause of epistaxis. So when an elderly patient comes, so if you have to judge the cause as per the age of the patient, okay, so you cannot label a child that comes to the OPD with epistaxis, you cannot get hypertension in your mind as a DD. No. So this has to be in elderly patients only. So disorders of blood and blood vessels. So blood dyscrasias, because of the prolonged BTCT PTA, they have this epistaxis as a presentation of their blood vessel disorders and bleeding disorders or coagulation disorders. Now, liver diseases like hepatic cirrhosis. So, vitamin K is produced there, the bleeding and clotting cascade goes on in the liver, and that is why hepatic cirrhosis, in this disease, there is derangement and the patient can have epistaxis as a presenting feature. So these are all secondary causes, systemic causes of epistaxis. Now, kidney diseases like chronic nephritis. So, in chronic renal failure, there is high urea, high creatinine, and this causes, again, dysfunctioning of the bleeding and the clotting factors. And then there is chronic nephritis. Now, excessive use of salicylates like aspirin, anticoagulants, clopidogrel or blood thinners. So most of these ischemic heart disease patients are put on long-standing aspirin, high doses, as well as blood thinners. So you must, when you're examining the patient of epistaxis in the OPD, you must take history, drug history, in the form of whether they are using aspirin or any anticoagulants or blood thinners. Because usually after angioplasty, after bypass surgeries, in ischemic heart disease, in women above 40 years of age who are post-menopausal, we do give aspirin. Okay. Now, vicarious menstruation. Vicarious menstruation is during menstruation, a lady or a girl can have bleeding from the nose. This is just because of the increase in the vascularity in the nose. So even in pregnancy, you can get this as well as during menstruations. Okay. But when the bleeding occurs from the nose during menstruations, it is called as vicarious menstruation. Now, idiopathic. So as I told you, many times the cause of epistaxis is not clear. That time we label the patient as idiopathic. But mind you, you have to search for all the local and the systemic causes. And when nothing is found, then only you can label this as idiopathic. Now, just to sum up again, this is the chart showing you the etiology of epistaxis. So trauma, mucosal irritation, septal abnormalities, for example, septal perforation. So what is septal perforation? So usually in septoplasty, we elevate one side of the mucosa and then we remove the deviated portion of the septum. In SMR, we elevate both the sides. Mucoperichondrium is elevated from both the sides, and while elevating, suppose you traumatize the same site on both the sides, then you can get a septal perforation. Or there are other causes also of septal perforation. So when the patient has septal perforation, there is increased chances of crust formation and then bleeding. Then inflammatory diseases, as I told you already, acute rhinitis, viral rhinitis, diphtheritic rhinitis, rhinosinusitis. Then illicit drug use. What were the drugs? Repeat what I told you. What are the drugs that can cause epistaxis?
Clopidogrel, aspirin.
Yes, aspirin, clopidogrel, blood thinners. Okay, salicylates also. Now, iatrogenic causes, neoplasias. So, what were the neoplasias that we have to remember? In young adults, what is the neoplasm that you must remember? Adolescent male coming with epistaxis. Juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. And in an elderly patient, it will be carcinoma of the nasopharynx or carcinoma of the nose, carcinoma of the maxillary sinus. Now, systemic factors, as I told you, hypertension. Hypertension is the commonest cause, you must remember. Alcohol use leading to cirrhosis of hepatic cirrhosis or chronic liver failure. Then circadian rhythms. So morning and late afternoons you can get. Genetic disorders in the form of von Willebrand's disease, hemophilia. So these are all bleeding disorders. And adolescent male, we have already said nasopharyngeal, juvenile nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. So see, apart from clopidogrel and aspirin, you have other NSAIDs that can also cause epistaxis. The anticoagulants like warfarin, apart from clopidogrel, complementary and alternative medicines like ginseng and ginkgo biloba also can cause epistaxis. Okay. Then environmental factors, as we already said, high temperatures, then low humidity, sudden decompression, and scuba diving. Okay, and then comes idiopathic. So this epistaxis can be anterior when the bleeding comes from anteriorly. Okay, or the cause can be posterior, that is called as posterior epistaxis. Now you should know there is a list of all these causes. Sorry.
Second lieutenant.
Is anybody asking anything?
No, ma'am. Someone is on.
Okay, yeah. Only if you have questions, you put your mic on. Otherwise, just off it. So common causes of epistaxis. In children, you must remember nose picking, foreign body, exanthematous fevers. So all these viral fevers like measles, German measles, chicken pox, all this can cause epistaxis as a presentation. In adolescents, as I told you, you must remember nasopharyngeal angiofibroma. Apart from that, trauma, I told you in dry climates, you can get crusting in the nose, and even an adolescent can do nose picking at this time. Then sinusitis. In adults, you must remember sinusitis and again trauma. Elderly patients, hypertension and malignancy should be remembered as the common causes of epistaxis. Okay. Now general causes, again hypertension is the first. So most of the times the patient is sent from the medicine OPD to us saying that he's having epistaxis, or we see the epistaxis, and when we record the BP is very high and we send to the physician for starting of antihypertensive drugs. So hypertension you must remember as the most common cause of epistaxis in elderly patients. Bleeding disorders, hemophilia, thrombocytopenia, leukemias, drugs, that is aspirin, anticoagulants, physiological, that is cold, dry climate, high altitude, vicarious menstruation, violent exertions, barotrauma. All these are general causes which are general physiological causes of epistaxis. then liver failure and exanthematous fevers. So we have just revised all the causes.
अभी उल्टा देख रहा है बे वो.
Now, sites of epistaxis. Okay. Sites of epistaxis. So 90% of the cases, it is from the little's area. So I told you clearly over the septum, just above the vestibule is a area in which you have the anastomosis of all these vessels coming from above and below. That is the anterior ethmoid, posterior ethmoid, spinopalatine, septal branch of the greater palatine, and the superior labial artery. So all these form the little's area, and this plexus is called as the Kesselbach's plexus. So 90% of the cases, the bleeding is from this little's area. Then the next site is above the level of the middle turbinate. The third site is below the level of the middle turbinate. Fourth is the posterior part of the nasal cavity. Then diffuse epistaxis. So the bleeding can be both from the septum as well as from the lateral nasal wall. And the sixth site is the nasopharynx. Now, as I told you, the three sites which are important when there is epistaxis is your anterior epistaxis, where the cause is the little's area injury, and Kesselbach's arterial plexus, which is formed at the anteroinferior part of the septal cartilage. So in children, this is the common area of epistaxis or common site of epistaxis. Now Woodruff's plexus, this is, I told you, plexus near the posterior end of the middle turbinate. So in elderly hypertensives, this is the common site of epistaxis. So posterior epistaxis, or when there is damage to Woodruff's plexus, venous, it is a venous plexus. So this near the posterior end of the middle turbinate, this area is common site for bleeding in elderly hypertensive patients. Then again, I told you, in young persons, you can get, as well as in adults, you can get retrocolumnar vein epistaxis, that is again venous plexus. So the Woodruff's plexus and the retrocolumnar vein cause venous bleeding, whereas the Kesselbach's area plexus causes arterial bleeding. So the pressure is more in arterial, in the arteries than in the veins. So it is a little difficult to stop the arterial bleed than the venous bleed by just pressure. Okay. This is again a revision, as I told you, showing you again the little's area, showing anterior epistaxis. This is the posterior Woodruff's area. So posterior end of the middle turbinate, where you get the Woodruff's venous plexus. Okay. And then, as I told you, commonest is the little's area. The second area is above the level of the middle turbinate. Third is below the level of the middle turbinate. Fourth is posterior nasal cavity. Then diffuse, that is both from the septum as well as the lateral wall. And sixth is the nasopharynx. So when we classify anterior and posterior epistaxis, so when it is anterior epistaxis, you see the profuse bleeding coming from the nostrils over your trickling over your lips and your philtrum. Whereas in posterior epistaxis, you get the blood flowing back into the throat, and sometimes you might have vomitus of coffee ground color blood. That is, there is alteration of this because of acid ferritin formation. There is coffee ground color to the vomitus. So digestion of blood in the stomach by HCl. Now, how do you differentiate between anterior and posterior epistaxis? Now, anterior epistaxis is more common, posterior is less common. Okay. Anteriorly, it is from the little's area, whereas posteriorly, posteriorly it is from the posterior superior part of the nasal cavity. Age, Anterior epistaxis most commonly seen in children or young adults, whereas posterior epistaxis is common after 40 years of age. Now, anterior epistaxis, the cause is usually trauma, whereas posterior is spontaneous, often due to hypertension or arteriosclerosis. So how does arteriosclerosis cause epistaxis? So you know there is atherosclerosis of the blood vessels and deposition of cholesterol, and due to that the vessels cannot contract and stop the bleeding. So arteriosclerosis, and because of atherosclerotic vessels there is spontaneous bleeding. Now, usually anterior epistaxis is mild and can be easily controlled, whereas bleeding is severe in posterior epistaxis and requires hospitalization and post-nasal packing. So we'll come to that later, what is anterior and posterior nasal packing. Now, how do you evaluate a patient with epistaxis? So once a patient comes into the OPD, you will ask regarding the mode of onset, the duration, the frequency, the amount of the blood loss, the side of the nostril, the side, as I told you, anterior or posterior, and whether there were any previous episodes of bleeding or this is the first attack of bleeding. So all this should be done fast. You cannot keep the patient bleeding there and start taking the history for hours together. Okay. So you have to stabilize the patient, stop the bleeding, and simultaneously you're talking with the patient and taking the history. Okay. Now nasal trauma, history of purulent nasal discharge to rule out rhinitis, rhinosinusitis. Then any past history of hypertension, hepatic disease, family history of bleeding to rule out bleeding disorders, bleeding from other sites in cases of leukemias, use of anticoagulants, aspirin, blood thinners. Okay. Then next thing what you do is you measure the pulse rate and the blood pressure. Okay. After this, what are the important investigations that you are supposed to do in a case of epistaxis? So hemoglobin, you want to know how much was the blood loss, so it gives you a rough idea of how much blood the patient has lost. Packed cell volume, then blood grouping and cross matching in case the patient needs any transfusion, this is important. Then bleeding time and clotting time. Then APTT, that is activated partial thromboplastin time, prothrombin time, platelet count, diagnostic nasal endoscopy to see the site of bleeding, CT scan of paranasal sinuses to rule out any mass lesions or inflammatory infective lesions. Now, management of epistaxis. So there are some general measures. Then you can control the epistaxis by nasal cautery, then anterior nasal packing, posterior nasal packing, and arterial embolization. Okay, what are the general measures? So home care, that is avoid handling of the nose and nose picking. Pinch the nose when there is bleeding with the thumb and the index finger for about 5 minutes to stop fresh bleeding. Head up position, then Trotter's method. What is Trotter's method? You bend forwards, you press the nostrils or you compress the nostrils and you breathe slowly through the mouth. Okay. Then cold compresses over the nose. So you can take a kerchief and put crushed ice in that and put it over the nose, or you can, in the wards what we do is we fill crushed ice in the glove and we keep that glove over the nose of the patient. So this is cold compresses to cause vasoconstriction. Reassurance, so you know when there is bleeding from any side, the patient gets panicked. So reassure the patient, calm him down. You can also give a mild sedative like alprazolam. Okay. Once you rule out the cause of bleeding, then you can sedate him. So Restil, we give either 0.25 mg BD or HS. Then position of the patient. Patient should be in a head up or 45-degree head up position. recording of the blood loss, monitoring of vital parameters, O2 if he is little restless, antibiotics, investigations, treatment of cause. Now, see, this is to show you the Trotter's method. So she is leaned forward, she's pressed her nostril and she's breathing through the mouth. So this is the Trotter's method. So bleeding from Little's area can be stopped by this method. So if you compress or press the nose for about 5 minutes and take the Trotter's position, that is, the patient is made to sit leaning forward and breathes quietly through the mouth and cold compresses applied over the nose. This can be a first aid for the anterior epistaxis. Again, this is to show you that you can insert cotton pledgets. Now this has to be done in the hospital as interns. When the patient comes to the casualty, you can soak 1 in 1000 the cotton pledgets, 1 in 1000 adrenaline, and put it in the nasal cavity. This might bleed, this might reduce the bleeding. But sometimes it is said that you get reflex bleeding when you use adrenaline at any site. Okay, so initially the bleeding stops, but later again you can get more amount of bleeding. So this should be done more by an expert. Then if you can localize the site of bleeding, there is something called as chemical cauterization. So either with trichloroacetic acid or silver nitrate crystals, or with an electrobipolar or unipolar cautery, you can just cauterize that area of the bleed and stop the bleeding. Now, the third management is anterior nasal packing for anterior epistaxis. So, when you do this anterior nasal packing, this has to be kept for 48 hours to 72 hours under cover of antibiotics. So you are putting some foreign material in the nose, be it a roller gauze or be it a Merosil pack. When you use anything foreign in the body, you have to give an antibiotic cover. So when packs are there, or any you put a roller gauze for abscess, suppose it is abscess or it is anterior nasal pack, you must give antibiotic cover. Then this anterior nasal pack, if you are using a hospital made roller pack, so it is a ribbon gauze which has to be smeared with liquid paraffin, and what we use is soframycin antibiotic. Sometimes we can use a Vaseline gauze or a BIPP gauze or a Merosil tampon. And this Merosil tampon, you just have to insert it in the nose, and you can then just a minute, I've lost. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is to show you how we do the anterior nasal packing. So first you have to either use a 10% xylocaine spray and anesthetize the nose, or if there is no time, just soak cotton pledgets with 4% xylocaine and keep it in the nostril. Now, if the bleeding is profuse and the bleeding point is not localized, you have to go for anterior nasal packing. So it is a 2.5 centimeter gauze in adults, which is soaked with liquid paraffin and an antibiotic. Okay, and in children you can use a 12 millimeter gauze. So it can be done either vertically or in a horizontal layer. So this is showing you anterior nasal packing in a horizontal layer. So here you have to take care that the end of the pack has to be kept outside so that you have the start of the gauze and the end of the ribbon gauze. Okay. So it should not go, if you leave it like that in the floor of the nose, it might, because of the sticky secretions or because of the paraffin, which is very slippery, it might enter into your posterior nasopharynx, okay, and come and dangle in the throat, and the patient can have vomiting because of this. So when you are packing, you have to take care that both your start end and the last end of your gauze remains outside in the nostril, okay, at the start of the nostril. So this is what is showing you the horizontal anterior nasal packing. This diagram is showing you the vertical nasal packing. Okay. So packing is done with which forceps? So what is the name of the nasal packing forceps? So it is a Tilly's packing forceps, wherein you have the a space between the two prongs for the gauze to house in. Okay. Then systemic antibiotics should be given to prevent infection and toxic shock syndrome because of the foreign material that has been kept in the nose. So this pack is not to be removed and before 48 hours. Okay. Now this picture is showing you how we do anterior nasal packing with Merosil. So you get these ready packs of Merosil with a thread tied to it. So the thread remains outside so that we don't miss the tampon, and then you place it like this. So after you place it in the nose, then you inject Botroclot and try to, which is also a hemocoagulase, and then you swell the tampon so it fits snugly into the nostril and stops the bleeding. Now posterior nasal packing. So when your chemical cautery or your thermal cautery fails and even your anterior nasal pack is not stopping the bleeding, then and there is posterior bleed or the bleeding clots are coming out through the oral in the oropharynx, that time what you have to do is posterior nasal packing. Now always posterior nasal packing is to be followed by anterior nasal packing. It is a rule. Okay, you cannot do only posterior nasal packing. You have to follow it by anterior nasal packing as a rule and then give antibiotic cover also. Okay. Again, you can use a gauze pack or you can use Foley's catheter or Brighton's balloon, which has a double lumen, Epistat balloon, again, which has a double lumen, and Bivona balloon, which has a triple lumen. Okay. Now this picture is showing how we do posterior nasal packing for posterior nasal bleeds from the Woodruff's plexus or from the spinopalatine bleeds. So what we do is we pass a rubber catheter through the nose, get it out through the oral cavity, okay, tie a gauze tampon to this, and then you pull this through the nostril so that this gauze, roller gauze, comes and sits snugly in the posterior nasopharynx. Am I clear? Okay. Second is by your Foley's catheter. So you can put the Foley's catheter, which you use for your catheterization of bladder when there is stagnation of urine. The same thing you can use in the nose, and you can inflate this balloon here. So it is better to inflate it by air than with water because if the patient is unconscious, he might aspirate the water if the balloon ruptures. So you can inflate it with air. So inflate it with air and again pull this catheter anteriorly so that this inflated balloon comes and sits snugly in the posterior part of the nasopharynx. So this is how we do posterior nasal packing. Now, management E is, so first we said was your first aid Trotter's method. Then we talked about chemical cauterization or thermal cauterization if a bleeding point is seen in the nose. Then we talked about anterior epistaxis, for which we do anterior nasal packing. Then we spoke about posterior nasal packing for posterior epistaxis. Now, even after all this, if the bleeding doesn't stop, then what you have to do in refractive cases of epistaxis is arterial embolization. It is an invasive procedure and is performed in the angiography suite by an experienced neuroradiologist. So what is the procedure here? So you do a diagnostic angiography of bilateral carotid system. You catheter guide is put into the internal maxillary artery. Then a gel foam or polyvinyl alcohol particles are used for the embolization. Now, embolization is contraindicated if the patient is an elderly having severe atherosclerotic disease or is having anomalous anastomosis, okay, and is allergic to the dye or the contrast that is used during angiography. Now, arterial ligation is the next. So even with embolization, if it doesn't stop, then the next is arterial ligation. So what arteries can be ligated? So external carotid artery. So transantral or endoscopically, you can come to the maxillary artery and ligate it. Then the ethmoidal arteries and the sphenopalatine artery just behind the posterior end of the middle turbinate, you can do endoscopic clipping of the sphenopalatine artery. Okay. Arterial ligation can be done by external approach. So external carotid artery ligated in the neck distal to the superior thyroid artery. Now, why am I saying this? You are going to tell me in the next lecture why the external carotid artery must be ligated distal to its superior thyroid branch. Okay. Then second is internal maxillary artery is ligated in the pterygopalatine fossa by the Caldwell-Lux approach. So, you know, a sublabial incision is taken in the over the canine fossa, and you make an anterior antrostomy over the anterior wall of the maxillary sinus. That is called as Caldwell-Lux opening, and you ligate the internal maxillary artery in the pterygopalatine fossa. Then anterior and posterior ethmoidal artery can be ligated in the orbit by Lynch-Horvath incision. See, this is to show you the embolization. So this is a radioangiography taken and it shows you the blocked vessel after successful embolization. Okay. And this is to show you the posterior end of the middle turbinate, wherein you can see the sphenopalatine artery entering into the there is a cleft there, and there you can clip it. So this is the clip that is put on the sphenopalatine artery. Now, surgical management, you can do SMR surgery and SOS per excision. In hereditary telangiectasias, you can do laser therapy by using argon, KTP laser or Nediag laser. And there is a third surgical management, that is septodermoplasty. This is the algorithm of management of epistaxis. You can go through it.